did it that way. And he likes being over there because occasionally he gets up and leaves.
Yeah.
To take care of business or do something city managerially.
Actually, the exact quote was, "I didn't want to be with you crazies." Isn't that the quote?
No.
That's a pretty accurate description.
Was I a little off?
Let us know when we're ready recording, please. Okay, good evening, everybody. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Welcome to the City Council study session. We have just one agenda item for the evening, and that is budgeting for community goals review. Park, Recreation, and Library Services Director Dorothy Hargrove is present to present a strategic view of the current budget, cost drivers, concern, opportunities, and the expected impact on 2018. Good evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us, Mayor and council members. I'd also like to introduce John Solomon, our library manager, who's here with us tonight, Joe Sack, Recreation Services Manager, Bob Spada and Dave Lee, the other two departmental managers, were not able to join us tonight, but if you have questions for them, I'll be glad to track them down. As the Mayor pointed out, the purpose of our presentation tonight is to talk about what services the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Library provides to the citizens of Englewood, how we impact the community, give an overview of the 2017 budget, look at some challenges that are ongoing, some upcoming projects that we're involved with, and then take a look at 2018 and beyond. What are some policy considerations that Council would need to keep in mind as we develop plans for the future? I'll let you do that. How's that? Thank you. We have a lot of parks. We have very popular parks. We have over 554 group reservations for our shelters. We do charge for that, so it's a source of income, but there's more demand than we have shelters to meet. Our athletic fields had over 2,200 reservations in 2016. That's a lot of soccer and lacrosse games. We don't actually count the number of people or the number of dogs who use our parks, but I know how popular it is, and I'm sure you do as well. The Englewood Recreation Center welcomed 240,300 people, give or take a couple, in 2016. We had new weight room equipment added in late 2016 that is very, very popular. Cardio pieces were updated as well. We have pool, activity rooms, track, gym. It's a full-service recreation center that the citizens can be proud of. We have special events. We also rent out rooms for both corporate and community events. The Malley Recreation Center is a gem of the community. Last year, they welcomed 112,500 visitors through their doors. They have activity rooms for classes, cultural arts, speakers, author visits, educational activities, ballroom for activities, as you can see, dancing. The weight room equipment was also updated at the Malley Center in 2016. There are many special community events that bring people together. There's hiking, outdoor excursions, and room rentals, again, bring in some income both during regular hours and after hours. So it's used constantly. The Englewood Public Library on the first floor of this building welcomed over 230,000 visitors last year of all ages. I think actually there were some little ones who go underneath the counters, but that's pretty close. Some of the basic services that the library provides are research and technology assistance, print and digital collections. Our digital circulation, checking out e-books and e-magazines, continues to increase. We provide great computer access, meeting and study rooms. This year, for the first time, we're charging for meeting rooms. Study rooms are still free, first come, first serve each day. We're now providing story time 6 days a week instead of 5, and welcome a lot of young people and families into the facility. Broken Tee Golf Course, there are lots of different ways to measure the activity in a golf course, but we chose over 100,000 visitors. That's both people who come to play a round of golf, just to use the practice facilities, or the driving range, which are fabulous. It's a championship course. It's been award-winning. The Colorado Avid Golfer Awards for Best Family and Training Facility, make it a very popular course in the metro region. Par 3 continues to do well. Foot golf is popular. We're getting more and more teams and parties using foot golf. It's fun to watch. The golf course has also taken over, more or less, the management of the River Run Trailhead, just because it's contiguous to the golf course, and so they're managing that facility. That is almost finished. We have just a little bit of parking lot work left to be done, but I hope, again, everyone's had a chance to visit that facility. It remains as popular as we hoped it would. Pirates Cove is only open for 3.5 short months in the summer. Last year, they welcomed 88,700 visitors during that time, and you all have to keep your fingers crossed for really good dry weather in the summer. The parks people don't like it, but Pirates Cove certainly does. There are lots and lots of birthday parties. They provide swim lessons before the facility opens. There are rentals, which increases the income. You can rent cabanas. You can also rent the entire facility for corporate or community events. It's a very popular, continues to be a very popular regional attraction. Well, all of those, should be familiar services to council. But the question, why do we provide these services? City charter explicitly states that council shall provide for community recreation programs and parks, recreational areas, and facilities. The department structure, as listed in Title I, includes the operation of departments of parks, recreation, and library services. And we also, as a department, help to reach some of the community goals. Our primary one is the recreational, cultural, educational, and lifelong learning opportunities. But we also support the sustainable natural environment, a very important part of our park system. We also support safe and healthy communities with our focus on health and wellness and attractive neighborhoods. All right, now we get to the money. The presentation I put together tonight includes all of the funds that affect the delivery of services. And in Parks and Recreation, that is it's a lot more than just the general fund. There are several moving parts. I've included both capital and operating funds in these estimates. To run the department this year, we have budgeted $11,690,000. General fund pays for $7.4 million of that. Arapahoe County Open Space Shareback, $912,000. The lottery dollars, which are given through the Conservation Trust Fund, support $440,000 of our expenses. Golf will cost us over $2 million. Additional capital from the Capital Fund and the Public Improvement Fund of about $200,000. And our donors and trust funds, we have budgeted to expend $632,000. The donors and trust fund and the capital are all capital. We know what we're spending the capital funds on. The donors and trust funds sort of depend on what projects we undertake in 2016, but those funds are available to us. The next slide is just a graphical representation of those expenses. You can see that the general fund accounts for about 64% of our expenses, but Arapahoe County Open Space and the CTF funds and the Donors Fund are important sources of income. I will point out that in the general fund expense, that's where the majority of our operating costs come. About 2/3 of that is for personnel, about 1/3 for operating costs out of the general fund. But the good news is there are sources of revenue. We have the general fund, which obviously supports this, but recreation revenue of all types helps to offset some of those costs. We also expect Arapahoe County to send us about $775,000 this year. The Conservation Trust Fund, we anticipate an income of $300,000. The fee in lieu, and again, that is an allocation of current funds of $245,000. And we've applied for 2 grants from Arapahoe County Open Space, as you may remember, one for shelters at Bellevue Park and the other for shelter at Rotolo. And we're keeping our fingers crossed that those grants will be awarded to us. I will point out that all of these revenue sources are variable. Obviously, you know that our sales tax income from the general fund varies according to the economy. The same is true with recreation revenue. I mean, it's dependent on whether our programming is successful, properly priced, and well attended by the communities. Open space is based on sales tax. Conservation Trust Fund is based on lottery dollars, so everyone go out and buy your lottery tickets. Thank you. Fee in lieu is obviously based on development activity and the amount of charges against the park, depending how that goes in the city this year. And I've put these together now by sort of subgroupings to help make sense of them. Recreation services, I've combined recreation administration, the recreation center, and the Malley Center expenses all together. It does not include the golf course or Pirates Cove, but those I'll treat separately. The income that's brought in by recreation revenue covers about 50% of those expenses. That's in line and sometimes a little better than comparable recreation centers. But the important point to keep there is that we're a long way from being able to cover all of our expenses with revenue. The Conservation Trust funds, which we use for both capital and some ongoing maintenance, we cannot use it for any personnel, accounts for about 8.8% of those expenses. So you can see that it's very important that we have those funds. The Pirates Cove costs us about $1 million to run operationally each year. And the expected revenue, again, hoping for good weather, will cover about 124% of those costs. In other words, they recover costs plus about another quarter, another 25%. Conservation trust funds are very important for maintaining and the ongoing maintenance and improvements of Pirates Cove, about 10% of our expenses. That 24% over expenses, that is net revenue, goes back into the general fund. And that is estimated this year to be about $260,000. So it is a source of revenue for the general fund. Broken Tee Golf Course, as you well know, is an enterprise fund. The expenses this year are estimated about $2 million. And that includes an annual debt payment of about $208,000 on revenue bonds that are maturing in 2033. After expenses, we have only budgeted net revenue of about $36,000. That net revenue will go back into the golf course fund, which is rolled over year to year, and we expect the balance at the end of this year to be about $587,000. I will say that, if we were to live the golf course dream and update the entire well and irrigation system for maximum efficiency, we'd need another $1 million or $2 million just to make that happen. But we're very happy to have the golf course fund money to cover unexpected or emergency costs. The library has expenses of about $1.2 million. They served those 230,000 people with just 4 full-time employees and rely for the rest of our service on wonderful part-time staffers. We have for the last 4 years, I think, received grants from the Colorado State Legislature for the purchase of children's books. That actually survived the budget discussions in the state legislature this year, so that's an additional $9,500. We also actively pursue partnerships. Marmot, as you know, is one of the more far-reaching ones. We pay to be a member of Marmot, but we pay a lot less than we would as a standalone library, and the resources that we have available are beyond anything that we could support as a standalone. We work very closely with the schools, and all that fun acronym up there is the Arapahoe County Early Childhood Center. So we work with them as well. Parks. It costs us about $3 million to keep our parks going every year. And we rely very heavily on Arapahoe County Open Space Shareback funds. About $115,000 of those funds every year are allocated to staff expense, which helps us, obviously, with the maintenance of the park, and capital funds and other operating funds like, for flower beds and tree maintenance. If we did not have Arapahoe County, if the citizens decide ever to sunset that particular tax, we would feel it. The general fund supports about 70% of what we do in parks. So, taking a look at 2017 after the first quarter, it looks like our revenue and expenses are in line. We haven't had any surprises, knock on wood. We have several capital projects underway. We've just finished the water line to the Canine Corral, so our four-footed friends will have water this summer. As I mentioned, we are working on the Rotolo Park Playground. The Railroad Bridge trestle improvements are moving along, I hope. The library adult services and technology upgrade, we're finishing planning and hope that is finished by about October. You'll hear later tonight about a request for new flooring at the Malley Center. We've also been working on the exterior lighting for safety and improvements at that facility. There are a few other minor capital projects, but those are the big ones we're waiting on. And we hope to begin work on the key recommendations from the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, talking with the Parks and Rec Commission about that, and I'll mention a little bit more in a minute. And as I mentioned, we have grant applications outstanding for Arapahoe County Open Space. I'd point out that the Arapahoe County has 2 grant cycles each year, and this is just the first one. With any luck, we can apply later and perhaps receive funds in November. Since 2005, we've received over $3 million, $3.5 million, I think, in grants from Arapahoe County Open Space. We'd like to be optimistic that will continue, but it might not be prudent to always count on it. So what challenges do we face moving forward? One of the biggest ones is a minimum wage increase. We did not factor into the 2017 budget the 90 cents an hour minimum wage. And it's important to keep in mind that it's not just the people who were earning $8.30 an hour who will be affected by that. It has a ratcheting effect on all of our part-time staff. It's hard for me to give a firm estimate of what that's going to cost us, but taking a percentage of our part-time and temporary wages, I'm estimating that across our different divisions it'll cost us about $75,000 in that neighborhood. And it's important to keep in mind that the minimum wage continues to increase until 2020 at 90 cents a year. So we'll continue to have this ratcheting effect, although certainly in 2018 we'll try and build that into the budget because we know now that's the lay of the land. The other challenges are maintenance needs. They simply outstrip what we're available to in the budget. All of our irrigation in the parks is 40 years old. We're working on it piecemeal, trying some experiments for water conservation and different equipment, starting first in the southwest Greenbelt. But if we were to replace, a single park irrigation replacement is, $500,000. And our facilities, just like our homes, always need repair. We had mysterious tile buckling in the rec center. And nobody can seem to quite figure that one out, but those sorts of unexpected, not major, but significant expenses continue in all of our facilities. We hope to increase revenue from recreation programming, but that's not a given. There's increased competition from private and surrounding areas. So we're focusing very hard on making sure that the program, classes, and events that we provide really meet community needs. We're using that SD scorecard method. It's data-driven, so that we can say this class attracted this many people and it raised this much revenue. Is this an important activity to continue to invest in? Is this something that we should change? And I would point out that money is not our only guideline. Some things lose money, but they meet such an important community need that it's still important to subsidize them. You know, we had talked about this when we were discussing the master plan. The idea, for instance, that swim lessons for young people serves a community good and doesn't necessarily need to cover all of its costs. But that detailed analysis and re-examination of our programming will be ongoing. I think we're also challenged by safety considerations. We've got staffing. We simply don't have the proper staffing, I think, in our recreation center pool. Too many times we have a 17-year-old lifeguard part-time who's in charge of the pool. Wonderful young people, but not necessarily trained or mature enough to handle difficult situations. We also, have a single person at the front desk, sometimes alone in the building, which is a level of risk that I personally am uncomfortable with. We have some structural issues, like at the rec center. It's very easy to just walk in the building and not check in. We really don't know who's in that building or what they're doing, and have the kind of control that we'd like. So those are challenges in all of our facilities, and I'm sure you're aware of the challenges with the library and facilities here in this building that we've spoken of before. But life is always fun. We can look ahead to capital projects. As I said, we'd like to move forward with Parks and Recreation Master Plan recommendations. This slide says initial phases require no additional funding, which is absolutely true, but it depends on how you define initial phase. We have saved about $885,000 in the Conservation Trust Fund toward upgrades of Pirates Cove. One of our most important upgrades is to replace the children's play structure, and we're estimating that would cost about $1.2 to $1.5 million. So while we've saved a good deal of it, we haven't covered enough. Cushing Park improvements was one of the recommendations from the master plan, and that would have to be phased in order to completely redo the entire park. It's $5-6 million. But we can do some initial planning. Maybe we can upgrade the restrooms and the shelter, and consider the skate park. That will be a conversation with the Parks and Rec Commission, with you, obviously community input. We're a long way before we start making any improvements there. But it is important that we put together a funding plan, because especially with Cushing Park, I think that would be the sort of project that the Great Outdoors Colorado grants would look favorably on. It would make sense for us to apply for a big grant from them, as well as Arapahoe County Open Space. So if we can get our ducks in a row and try to leverage our dollars with grant dollars, we'll move further ahead. Recreation center improvements, we're doing some studies now to see what we can do to bring the recreation center and the Malley Center up to date and make sure that we're fully utilizing the space as effectively as we could. Again, that will be phased. What makes sense to do in the next 2 or 3 years, what would make sense to do in 5 years, depends on the studies that we would do. So those are our big projects that we're hoping to move forward on. Operationally, we, as I said, maintenance and staffing continue to be a challenge. Where are options for additional funding if we want to keep these services robust and healthy? We might consider the fee in lieu amounts. I know that there's a discussion about impact fees throughout the city. Is our fee for the parks sufficient and useful in the marketplace? I will point out that we have, I think, about $347,000 in that fund now, and that is the accumulation of funds from 2012. We have not expended any funds out of that since 2012, and probably about time that we used it for some park improvements, but it's not an endless pot of money, let's put it that way. Another possible consideration is the reauthorization of the recreation mill levy. The current bonds mature in 2023. The current mill levy is 1.924 mills, and that was a bond measure that was passed to expand the Recreation Center, Malley Center, and build Pirates Cove. So we're still receiving income on that to pay down those bonds. I would also encourage us to look at additional partnerships and regional opportunities. What can we do with both private and public partners that will help leverage our dollars and expand services to our community without necessarily providing that service ourselves? And that can be very small, relatively small, like working with our weight training advisor, having them provide a service and we just take a cut, or we could look at larger regional opportunities. That's a wide open field, but one that I think we should keep in the back of our minds. So, as a recap, things that we all need to keep in mind for the 2018 budget, what are our core services? What are the most important things for our citizens? What is required by charter, and what do our citizens expect? I don't think it'll come to news to any of us that our citizens have very high expectations for the quality of service, and we don't want to disappoint them. How do we plan for needed capital improvements? As I say, we can make incremental steps toward capital improvements, but we do not have the funding sources to invest in our parks and recreation facilities that are really needed. And how do we increase revenue in our recreational programming while still providing affordable opportunities and opportunities that are essential and important to our communities? So that's my overview. I'd be more than happy to answer questions, take comments.
Great, Council. Questions or comments? I do have a few. Maybe I can open up. Thank you for that great presentation. I think this is a great start for the council to sort of delve into departmental level sort of discussions. If you don't mind, I've just got a few questions and sort of comments. The first question, I guess, is regarding medians and outdoor streetscape and Paseo. What portion of that is parks managing, if any, as far as medians in town? I'm thinking of like the Paseo and as well as the planters in Northern Broadway. Do you guys maintain those?
Yes. And on the tip of my tongue is the exact amount, but I'll have to get back to you on that.
No problem.
We do annually budget for that and the holiday lighting. And I wish Dave were here. I think it's out of the open space, or is it capital? Okay.
So you guys do the planters,
Yes.
the Paseo,
Yes.
as well as the medians?
Uh-huh.
Okay, great.
And we outsource some of that
I've just
to
got a little bit of a
subcontractors.
pet peeve with these issues. As I've been on council, I see like every spring and summertime we spend a lot of money sort of dressing these up, and unfortunately I feel like every year I sort of share this concern about the durability of the things that are planted there, and I feel like every year they end up kind of dying and not looking great. And so I guess I'm just wondering, or trying to encourage perhaps a zero-scape kind of look, that could be not necessarily just seasonal, but, all year round kind of thing.
Well, we had just recently gone out for bids to get a new subcontractor because our staff can't do it because there's a lot of traffic control and special equipment that's included in that. But we have a new vendor for those medians, and that discussion has already taken place. I hope that they will listen to us and do exactly what you're saying.
No, and I sure appreciate that. From our perspective, I feel like I've shared that several years in a row, and every year they say, we got you, and we're planting at the right time, and this is the right type of, things to have in your median, and inevitably every year it seems to, it seems to fail, and I guess I would just encourage you to take a look at something that's, a little more durable and that can really kind of withstand a little bit of test of time, and that perhaps could last more than a few months.
Yeah.
And I'd love to see a line item as far as how much we're actually spending on all of that, like sort of combined citywide, perhaps as a council request.
No, I can certainly get that number to you.
I think one of the things council wants to do is kind of what you kind of highlighted, which is taking a look at pricing for, different things. And, as a policymaker, without kind of a revenue manual or, a cheat sheet of where all of our revenues are and where they sort of come from and when's the last time we reevaluated them, it's kind of difficult for us to get a gauge on, what's kind of next in your mind as far as pricing reevaluations. Do you have in your mind some idea of what we kind of need to look at this year and next year and that kind of thing?
We look at every source of revenue every year.
Okay.
As I said, we're in the midst of a process with the recreation classes. Are we charging market prices for our park shelters? We did raise the shelter fees this year. That I think there's still a bargain, and certainly we give a discount to the residents. But that's a constant activity. We've raised fees in all of our areas every year, or adjusted them. I think that's fair. Would you agree? Okay.
Well, it doesn't need necessarily to be adjusted every year, but I'm glad to hear you guys are going through that evaluation. Perhaps that's something I think perhaps other departments maybe need a little more evaluation on. The water to Canine Corral, what percentage of that project did we fund? I know there were some ideas or thoughts about, Englewood Unleashed raising some funds for that. Was that ever come to fruition?
Yes and no. They raised about $3,200 over the years. The cost of the water line was closer to $16,000. So we covered that out of shareback funds, open space funds. But the board of Englewood Unleashed has agreed to buy some dog agility equipment to upgrade the canine corral. So they are contributing to that, and their volunteer hours are very welcome. But they were not able to raise enough money to cover that cost.
Well, that's great. They've been wonderful partners. I'm glad to hear they were
Absolutely.
participating and are still continuing to help us improve some of those amenities over there, because I will say that, our park's utility just goes through the roof, I feel like, when we allow some dog use, and so I appreciate us continuing to look and sort of improve those. Are you saying the improvements for Cushing Park, we haven't yet gone through the process of applying for GOCO and, did you say Arapahoe County Open Space? Is that what it was?
No, we
Grants?
have not applied for grants. We would need to put together a very carefully thought out and community vetted plan for that park and put together a budget before we could apply for grants.
Awesome.
So
I
that's
would certainly encourage us to do that. I feel like Cushing is relatively low-hanging fruit as far as, one that I think is probably overdue for some improvement, and kind of showed in, I think, the studies and things that we did. In your mind, what would be sort of the next park if there's another, low-hanging fruit that perhaps we could get, that process started? Because I imagine the grant process is pretty lengthy.
Yes. I would love to hear council's thought on that. Our two top choices are Jason Park and Miller, as identified in the park in the master plan. There are pros and cons to both of them. I think if I were queen of the forest, I would choose to fix Miller and upgrade that. But Jason Park is very well used, very popular. could definitely use new playground equipment, restrooms, shelters. So I think that would be a choice that council and the community would have to make.
And so will we begin that grant process, or do we need to have some sort of discussion about Cushing and whether we want to go through that process?
Yes, yeah. I think we need to be pretty far along in the planning before we could consider even applying for a grant. I mean, you just can't apply for a grant and then ask them, and then decide later what you're going to spend it on. We would need to be able to say, we're applying this grant to the playground equipment at Cushing, and our estimate is based on quotes, $500,000 or whatever it would be. So that's the process that we'd have to move forward with.
I'd certainly encourage you to pursue that, and perhaps council can sort of weigh in here tonight. Finally, just real quick, Pirates Cove improvements, is the climbing wall concept kind of approved, or is that moving forward, or no?
Climbing wall.
There was a number of ideas that came out of the master plan process to improve Pirates Cove, and really the consensus of the feasibility study of Pirates Cove really shown that there wasn't community support to expand the footprint of Pirates Cove. So really internally, we had looked at all of the things that have the biggest impact, and probably before we add, even though a climbing wall is a relatively inexpensive item to add, we probably think at this point it'd be better in our interest to improve the features that we do have first before we add any additional features. And the main play structure is what you walk into as you come into the park, and that's where the bucket dump is, and that whole play structure. There's that apparatus is to its useful life. It's towards the end of its useful life. There's valves and things that we just can't repair anymore, and there's the water features inside that play structure that just don't function as they're supposed to anymore. And plus, it's just not as attractive. And that is really your first kind of gateway into the park at this point. So, and there's been a lot of advances. It's the 13 years, 14 years since we've been open. There's a lot of advances that have been made in those play structures. Better durable materials. It's time to upgrade that probably first. But we have considered adding the climbing wall. It is a relatively inexpensive feature, but it would change a little bit of the use of the pool, the lower pool down below, and some guarding and staffing. We'd probably have to increase our part-time staff because it does require additional security and safety with that. But it is in the mix.
Okay, so it does envision like an additional lifeguard near it. Is that what it is?
Exactly. Actually, two.
Okay, Thank you, sir. Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you for putting this together. It's really helpful to see. My question is the water usage. I assume that those are included in the total expenses. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And I know we've taken steps towards water conservation. Is there any additional steps maybe we should consider to help save with the funding and water usage?
Yeah.
The first step would be to, we've almost done everything that we can right now, piecemeal, park by park, and the biggest is the irrigation system itself, the starting clocks, and those are now controlled by if there is measurable amount of rain, we don't water. They're timed and zoned and that sort of thing, and computer programmed, so that actually saves in a lot of the water conservation instead of the old manual type systems. Mm-hmm. But now we're to the point where if we don't improve the infrastructure of those systems, we can't really save any more water. So we're talking everything from the irrigation piping itself all the way to all the individual sprinkler heads. Some sprinkler heads, that have been in the ground for 15 years just aren't as good of, dispersing the water as the technology today. So that is, the biggest next step is to really take a hard look at all of the irrigation. And we do have some of that budgeted in our operating expenses now. And as we go through certain zones and parks that we know are failing or we have major repairs, then we're able to do upgrades. But it is kind of a haphazard, piecemeal, as-needed repair type of ongoing maintenance.
And we'll say if we do something in Cushing, is that pond efficient? Is the pumping station a water conservation? The answer is no. We could do better. So some of that, in addition to the irrigation systems, has to do with that kind of capital improvement as well as improvements in the types of plantings. Are we planting flowers and trees that are using more water than they should? So it's an ongoing issue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Barrington.
Could you please break down the amount of money that you spend on the paseos? I mean, you said you were responsible for those.
I will have to look into that, but I will definitely get that money for you. I can't tell you off
And
the
the
top of my
lease
head.
money that we charge, does that go to the parks?
Yes.
That goes back to them, okay.
So for Zomo for the Bob and then Zoma, when they come in, that'll go back to the parks.
Maybe there's a way for us to take a look at having that contract be that they keep up part of that they keep that up rather than the lease piece. They might actually fancy that up more. But I'm not sure what all the rules are for that. I mean, I was a little confused, like some of the fencing and stuff, and, they called that Green Deal artwork, and, they couldn't go have that included into the patio piece, and they should have. And maybe if they want to be more responsible for that, then maybe it would be more cost effective if we know what the costs are. And could you please, from the time that Pirates Cove has been open, what the amount is that it's cost us, and the
Cost? Okay.
the expenses that we've had, and the total amount of revenue that we've had. I'm concerned anytime that we divert money from something like that consistently into the general fund, and then I'll act surprised when it comes time for upgrades and maintenance and haven't had that piece of it worked into the budget. That money should be available. It's been a moneymaker, and we could have taken some money for the general fund and left some to go ahead and build up that account so that we could go ahead and clear that up. So see what we have that was available and what we diverted from there. Have you made a decision on any programs or anything that you're wanting to cut?
No.
You've made no decision on any programs or any particular events or activities at either? Nothing yet.
No.
Are you going to?
Probably.
When will we get that information?
I think we will. It's not going to be a once-a-year thing. I mean, we could look, for instance, at aquatics programs and decide that we might cut back Tuesday and Thursday high school swimming, something like that. So it'll be a constant activity. And let me say quickly that our goal is not to cut programs. Sometimes we could combine them. Sometimes there's a better way to deliver the service where we don't have to hire a separate facilitator or teacher, instructor. So we will look at a lot of things, but there's not a drop date. We're going to change everything. We certainly make that information public and would welcome feedback, but no decisions have been made. There's nothing's on the chopping block for sure.
I'm not sure it can be an ongoing process and a budget process too. If there's going to be some programming that's going to be looked at, it has to be part of the budget process.
That's true.
And I appreciate that you're consistently looking at things for the Parks and Rec Department, but we have to know what we're looking at for the budget so that the community understands what's happening with the budget. And then the reason that it's in the charter is because it's considered an amenity. It's part of what people pay for. It's an amenity that people live here for, and I don't think that the intention is or ever was, or that there ever was a time when a library in a municipality ever paid for itself. It's just was never an anticipation, wasn't going to happen. People knew that. That's why they wanted the library, and they knew that was going to be a cost and some fines and things. There'd be some revenue coming in, but it was never going to cover itself, nor the rec center. No. So while we want to make sure that there's efficiencies there, we want to keep that in mind. That's probably why it's in the charter. So if you could get that information,
we'd be glad to.
I'd appreciate that.
But could I reiterate, you'd like the paseo costs, what it costs, and what the lease is,
I think
and the
that
expenses?
I would like the cost for the one that was behind where Medici is now, because you're going to lose that because they're building on it, and they should upkeep. They bought that property, so you won't have that cost anymore. But how we're going to partner, since we've been talking about doing impact fees since well, since I came on council, we still don't have them, but they should be partnering up to take care of some of those amenities, just like the shopping center should be helping, I think, a little
And
with some of
I
that.
think Medici is, but I'll get
Right.
you the details.
And if we could get, like, the cost for some of the property taxes that we collect in that shopping center over for Big Lots, maybe a portion of that money should go to keep that little area park up there, so that we're sectioning off some of these things on who's benefiting and how we're doing this, and maybe we can get some partnerships going in there.
Okay.
The only one I would disagree with would probably be the golf course. I would hope that that would pay for itself a little bit more, but I'd like a little bit more numbers on, some more numbers on that in particularly, if we could.
On the golf course?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, the reason that the citizens went ahead and taxed themselves to improve the rec center and the Malley Center was because they wanted those services in this community, and we're listed, what, second best place in the state of Colorado to retire at. That's because we put that investment in there. Or is it first? You're shaking your head. Was it first? Oh, we could be first. We could be first.
I think
by
we were
now.
second, yeah.
Maybe we're first by now. I don't know.
We're good.
But it's because the community went ahead and made a decision that those were valuable assets, and they taxed themselves to go ahead and make sure that that investment was put in there. And I don't want to see that piece wasted, or where we're diverting money from things that are making money when we should be putting them back in. So if you could get that information, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Certainly will do so.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Jill. Share the mic with the Mayor Pro Tem.
Oh, sorry.
Thank
All you
you.
have to do is ask. You should already
I
see.
did. You did hear. That's okay. Thank you for this presentation. I really appreciate it. One of the things that some of us who've been on council a while have known the challenges of keeping our parks up to date. You know, keeping everything, keeping the sprinkler system working, and there's just a litany of things that are going on. So, two questions. One is at Cushing Park. Has there been any discussion about filling that water feature in, or does people like that? I've heard some parents say that they're more afraid of that water feature than appreciate it, because then they have to watch their kids, and it's just more. And I think we would gain some space and lose some stress for some parents on that. Have we had any discussion on that do you know of?
I'm not sure that was part of the community discussion. Did you comment
through the
on it?
master plan, that really never rose to the top as a concern. I think if anything we've heard is that it's such a unique element, and being able to have that in the park. I know that was noted in that process. So we have just recently, with our consultants from the master plan, is kind of wrapping up that design. Did it more in depth on Cushing, since it was our number one priority in the park. And just because of the design of the irrigation system, which uses that pond, that was retained in that design. Not to say that it couldn't be done differently, but that is how we water or irrigate the park.
Okay. And the second question is, it's supposed to be springtime. I don't know where spring went or where winter went, but it seems to be summer. And I know a lot of our parks are full of weeds. What is our plan this year? Are we going no spray this year, or are we going?
No,
Because there seems to be.
we have a regular weed eradication. It's just staying on top of it. We do use pesticides carefully, but we're not going all natural for that.
There's a
for sure.
gazillion dandelions. I tried to count them all, but I can't.
No, we've been.
They're just everywhere.
The team has been spraying. I know they have.
Okay, well,
Particularly difficult because of the no winter, that weeds really had a time to flourish, and they're coming earlier than in years past.
It seems to be more than usual. That's the only reason I asked. Thank you.
Come on, they're beautiful flowers. Do you know like dandelions?
They're on bloom right now, I do see.
And herbal.
Councilmember Russell.
Summer too.
Yeah.
Sustainability.
I just would like to bring up the fact that we do need to make sure that the infrastructure is taken care of before we move full force into the next grant, situation also because one of the questions is, can we maintain? And we have so much infrastructure that we're having trouble maintaining that I think we have to get a solution to that problem before we ever move forward on the Parks and Rec Master Plan. And hopefully this budget process will be able to get us there. And just some input that I have had in the last couple of weeks. The Malley Senior Center people are a little concerned that programs will be cut there. And I mean, I got an email probably, it was either over the weekend or it might have been today. I read it this afternoon. That, and this is probably true, that a lot of the senior citizens in this community have been paying taxes for a long time, and they just want to make sure that theirs aren't cut totally. So
There's no plan to do so, and we've certainly opened a dialogue. There'll be some retirements, which I think will change who's doing what, but we have no plans to eliminate services there at all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Wilson?
It's it's interesting. Councilmember Russell mentioned taxes because I think that's, I don't know if your email was like one of the contacts I've had, the moving of the tax help, the folks that volunteer to help that to the library
right.
for people in the Malley Center and those that live in that area was very upsetting. And actually the people who do the teaching for that actually approached me and said, how did that decision get made? Did you make that decision? So I know that those people who do the taxes themselves for their help them would love to see themselves being back at the Malley Center. So I don't know if that's what some of that is about, because it felt like a cut program to them, I think.
Well, it was a changed program.
It was a
for certain.
change, and it moved to a place that many of them can't get to. So that was, just feedback, same thing. I love this, and I sit on the Parks and Rec Commission, so I've heard some of this before, but maybe the Cushing Park, I think the little design that we got to see last week, I thought was really helpful. I don't know if you want to. I mean, that's in the records from that evening. I wonder if council would enjoy seeing that, or if it's too early to do that.
Well, no, I'm happy to share it. It's just very
Right.
very much a conceptual design.
Right, and it's
we
scary to
haven't
put that out
discussed
there.
anything with the
Right.
community or.
Well, maybe it's not a good thing to. It was nice to see us moving forward on some of that, and I just think that the community should know that there are some new things that probably will come if we can get the funding for it.
We're waiting for some very, very rough cost estimates to go along with that to see if any of that's even reasonable
Right.
or possible.
Right.
But certainly it's a place to start if we're just brainstorming, and no decisions would be made without community and council input.
Yeah.
For sure.
The other question I have, though, is on the operations looking ahead page. You talked about additional partnerships and regional opportunities. I don't have very much time here, I realize. But are there any examples of things you've seen going on in other communities where you think, gosh, it'd be fun to do that here, that we could be thinking about or be looking for?
Do you have an idea? I've got one.
A popular trend is what we're starting with our zone room right now is that we're becoming a boutique fitness area where we actually contract out our programming, our fitness programming. One, it saves us on cost of all the expense of the instructors that teach the programming. We're providing the space. Eventually, it hasn't happened yet, but we're hoping that room is going to be self-funding itself. Plus, what we get the advantage of is then it's open for our drop-in participants when they're not using the room. It's going to take us some time to build up the location and for people to know about it and for more people to join us in that programming. But that's, in recreation program, that's really becoming more of the trend.
That's a good
that we
example.
use community partners to come in and take some of our costs, but we provide them the space to be able to do their business.
Yeah.
And I would say we have a very good relationship with South Suburban Parks and Recreation and cooperative arrangements at Cornerstone, but there are some programs that they're able to provide that we do not, and providing extra and resident access for our community, working with them. I think we could explore expanding that relationship to improve services without a lot of additional cost.
I think those sound great. Those are a great way to expand without having it cost us a lot and creating new things that we can't maintain.
Thank you. We've only got a few minutes left here. I would like to try to steer us back towards a little bit of, some direction perhaps on this grant discussion with Cushing. Is there...
I just forgot one quick question. She would write it down.
Yeah, we can get to that in just a moment here.
It would only take a second.
Yep, and we'll get to it in just a moment. But, is there, substantial cost in your mind to go through that grant process so we can get some potential feedback, or perhaps council can say, hey, well, let's have this discussion another day. But I would hope that we're committed to improving our parks. And, in my mind, this is something that we would be doing regardless of whether or not we got a grant. And so, in my mind, this is kind of a no-brainer to proceed with this. Do you see substantial downside to the grant pursuit?
There is no cost to apply for the grant except our time to put together the grant proposal. The only thing that we do allocate is money in the open space fund for grant matching funds. But we don't take that money from other operational funds. So it really is a win-win if we get a grant, and if it's not awarded, we haven't lost anything but our time and our hope.
I would like to try to get consensus, unless council would like to have further discussion on this or have a comeback study session. But in my mind, let's get this ball rolling. Anybody want to weigh in on that?
I agree.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Good.
You're good with that? Thank you. I'm seeing some heads nodding. I'm going to suggest we have consensus to move forward
I have
with.
a question. Is that just for the Cushing Park or for
Yes,
the
I think it's
two?
just for Cushing right now, and that we'll have to try to pick what is the next item. And I think we heard from staff that they would probably like some feedback between Miller and Jason. Thank you.
But please keep in mind this is a multi-year process, so
Fair enough.
keep this in mind for multi-years.
Yep. So let's get the ball rolling so we can
Absolutely.
get those multi-years
Appreciate
started.
that.
Councilmember Barentine.
I wanted to know, you had mentioned some volunteer hours before. Do you track the volunteer hours? And
Yes.
if you do, I would like to get some information on the volunteer hours and the locations that they're at and the services that they're providing.
No, we have a robust volunteer program at the library, and especially at the Malley Recreation Center. We could not function without the volunteers who contribute their time and effort there. But I'll be glad to get you an accounting.
Right. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Russell. Councilmember Yates.
If we're going to be choosing between Jason versus Miller, I would say Miller would be the best one to start with because of all the changes that's happening over there with the police station and so on. So.
Thank you. I think we'll probably get some opportunities, over the next year or so to begin to kind of continue on that conversation about the next sort of priority. But hopefully, at least hopefully we can all agree Cushing's kind of the lowest hanging fruit, and perhaps we can go for that grant money. Any final comments or questions from council? Seeing none, I'd like to adjourn this and pick up at 7 o'clock next door.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for presenting.